So let's remember where we left Joseph last week. Now in Egypt, Joseph had interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh the king. And he told Pharaoh the king that there would be 7 years of good harvest in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine, where the crops wouldn't grow. And Pharaoh the king of Egypt had put Joseph in charge of Egypt like a prime minister. He'd given him a gold chain to wear around his neck and Pharaoh's own special ring so that people would know that Joseph was Pharaoh's man. And then he gave him his own chariot and told him to ride around Egypt. And so Joseph went around Egypt and he told the farmers during the years of plenty that they must save some of their grain ready for the years of plenty, of famine, so that people would still have food to eat. So that is what Joseph did. But we must leave Joseph for a moment in Egypt and go back to the land of Canaan, the land we now call Israel, and see what Joseph's father, Jacob, and his brothers were doing. So in the land of Canaan, Joseph's father, Jacob, and his 10 grown-up brothers were still living. You remember the brothers? These were the 10 brothers who threw Joseph into a pit and then sold him to be a slave in Egypt. Then they put animal blood on Joseph's coat, and they told their father Jacob that they had found the coat and that Joseph must have been eaten by wild animals. Joseph had also had a little brother in those days, little Benjamin. But by this stage in our story, so many years had passed that Benjamin had grown up. Now, I'm sorry to say that Jacob had not learned his lesson about having a favourite son. Benjamin was now the favourite. The older brothers, however, had learned their lesson. They didn't hate Benjamin for being their father's favourite, like they had hated Joseph. They loved him because he was their brother. Now, the famine in Egypt wasn't just in Egypt. There was a famine in all the surrounding areas, including Canaan. Now, one day when the famine had been going on for about 2 years, Jacob spoke to his sons. You know what? We're sitting here with no food, but I've heard that in Egypt they've got plenty of food because somehow they knew this was going to happen and they stored up lots of grain when there was plenty. Now, why don't you all go down to Egypt and buy some grain for them? Here is some silver coins for you to take with you to buy the grain. Although, actually, now I think about it, you 10 go, but Benjamin should stay here with me. You see, because of what had happened to Joseph, Jacob was scared that something might happen to Benjamin. So the brothers took the silver coins and began the journey to Egypt. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they went to see Joseph because of course he was the prime minister and he was in charge. And because he was the prime minister, they bowed down to him. Now, some of you may remember that a very long time ago, Joseph had once had a dream that his brothers would bow down in front of him. Now, Joseph had only been a teenager when the brothers last saw him, And now he'd grown into a big, strong and very handsome man, so the brothers didn't recognise him. Joseph, however, recognised them straight away, and he spoke harshly to them. "What are you doing here? Are you spies?" he said. No, we're not spies. We're all brothers. We're all from one family. We've left our youngest brother Benjamin at home with our father Jacob in Canaan, and all our wives and children are there too." "No," said Joseph, "I think you're spies, and I'm going to put all of you in prison." Well, of course, really, Joseph knew that they weren't spies. He knew that they were his brothers and that they really had just come for grain. But he didn't know whether he could quite trust them. And I have to say that I can't say that I blame him. So the brothers all went to prison, and they stayed there for 3 days. In prison, Reuben spoke to the others. "This is God punishing us for what we did to our brother Joseph, you know. We were horrible to him, and we really hurt him. We should never have done it." You see, they still didn't know who Joseph was, and they also didn't know that Joseph was listening. But Joseph heard what they said, and he realised that they were sorry. But he still didn't know if he could trust them. So on the 3rd day after he had put the brothers in prison, Joseph thought of a cunning plan. He called the brothers out of prison and he spoke to them. The brothers still didn't know who Joseph was. "I am going to test you," said Joseph. "I am going to keep Simeon here in the prison. The rest of you can buy grain and go back to your families in Canaan, but I won't release Simeon until you come back with Benjamin. And you won't be able to buy any more grain unless I see Benjamin." So Simeon went back to prison, and the other brothers bought bags of grain and travelled back to Canaan to their father Jacob and all their wives and children, who took as much as they could carry. So the 9 brothers, without Simeon, began their journey back to Canaan. "We will return with our brother Benjamin," they promised. But what they didn't know was that Joseph had given orders for their silver to be put back into their sacks with the grain that they had bought. They began the long journey back home, and they stopped for a rest on the first night, and they opened their sacks. But then they saw that the silver that they had brought with them to buy the grain was laying on the top of their sacks. "Oh no," said the brothers. "Now it looks as if we've taken the grain, but we haven't paid for it. It looks as if we've stolen it. Now the Egyptians are going to think that we're thieves. What are we going to do?" But there was nothing for it. They had to just continue with their journey back to Canaan. So when the brothers arrived back in Canaan with all the sacks of grain that they had bought in Egypt, they told their father Jacob, everything that had happened. "So you see, father," they said, "we have to return with Benjamin, or Simeon will be left in prison. But now they think we're thieves." "No way," said Jacob. I've already lost Joseph, and you are not taking Benjamin away from me." But gradually, all the grain was eaten until there was nothing left again in Canaan. And then Judah spoke up. "Father, we have to go back to Egypt to buy more food, and we have to take Benjamin. I will take personal responsibility for Benjamin, and if anything happens to him, you can punish me for the rest of my life." Well, Jacob could see that he had no choice. "Very well," he said, "take your brother Benjamin and go back to Egypt to buy more grain. You will need to take all the silver that was put into your sacks last time and give that back to him. Get back to them. Then you will need to take some more silver to buy more grain, and they might be a bit annoyed with you, so take some presents for the Egyptians as well." So once again, the brothers travelled to Egypt with double the amount of silver, some presents, and their brother Benjamin. When the brothers arrived back in Egypt for the second time, and Joseph saw them, he was just so happy to see them and so happy to see his younger brother Benjamin that he arranged a feast for all of the brothers, including Simeon, who came out of prison. Now the brothers, they still didn't know who Joseph was. And Joseph, he was so happy to see his brothers, but he still didn't know if he could trust them. So he thought of another cunning plan. He decided to send them back to Canaan the next morning with all the grain that they could carry. But he asked his servant to put his own silver cup, Joseph's silver cup, into Benjamin's sack and hide it in there. So the brothers set off for Canaan, but then Joseph sent his servant after them to stop them and question them. "One of you has stolen my master's silver cup," he said. "No," said the brothers, "we would never do a thing like that, but you can search our sacks if you want." So Joseph's servant searched the sacks, beginning with the eldest and finishing with the youngest brother, Benjamin. And there in Benjamin's sack was Joseph's silver cup. The brothers were taken back to Egypt to face Joseph. "What is this you have done?" Then Judah spoke up. "One of us has done wrong. We will be your slaves now here in Egypt." "No," said Joseph, "just Benjamin. He's the guilty one. He can be my slave." Then Judah spoke again, and he explained about his father, Jacob. "He's already lost one son. Punish me. I always said to my father, if anything happened to Benjamin, I would take the punishment. Punish me and let Benjamin go home to our father. I will be your slave here in Egypt." But then Joseph knew that his brothers had changed, and they were no longer the people that they had been when they had thrown him into the pit and then sold him as a slave. They had really changed. So he told them all who he was. "I am your brother Joseph," he said, "and I completely forgive you for everything you did to me. But you see, God has brought a good thing out of that bad thing. Go home and get our father and all your wives and children and all your animals and bring them to Egypt. So they did. Jacob came, and all the families, all the wives, all the children, all the animals, all came to Egypt. And Joseph gave them good land to live and to graze their animals, because the famine went on for another 5 years. So all of Jacob's family, who were God's special people, the Israelites, were saved from the famine, and they lived in Egypt for many years. So the important thing to remember from this week's story from the Bible is that even though Joseph was rejected by his brothers, God used Joseph to save his brothers and his whole family from the famine. They meant it for evil, but God used it for good because Joseph trusted God. You see, it was all God's plan. And it's a bit like Jesus. People rejected Jesus and put him on the cross. But that was all part of God's plan to save us. Jesus died on the cross to take the punishment for all the things that we do wrong so that we don't have to. So now we're going to do our craft to help us remember the story of Joseph.